From downtown Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the Senate Republican Primary Candidates Debate.
Hello and welcome to the debate between Republican primary candidates running for their party's nomination for U.S. Senate. My name is Doug Wilks, executive editor of the Deseret News based here in Salt Lake City, and I've been invited to moderate this debate organized by the Utah Debate Commission. This event, held on June 2nd, is part of the Utah Debate Commission's work to educate Utah voters and encourage the civil exchange of ideas. The candidates running for the nomination are Becky Edwards, Ali Isom, and Mike Lee, the incumbent senator. The winner of this primary election will then compete in the November general election representing the Republican Party. Those that have registered to vote in the Republican primary should start receiving their ballots in the mail next week. If you're an unaffiliated voter, you can still register to vote in the Republican primary until Election Day, which is June 28th. The Utah Debate Commission invited all three Republican candidates to participate in this evening's debate. Becky Edwards and Ali Isom accepted that invitation. Senator Lee declined and is not here participating this evening. Just a quick note about our format. Each candidate will have the opportunity to give a 1-minute opening statement. I will then ask questions of each candidate, who will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. I will also invite the candidates to give a 30-second response or rebuttal where appropriate, and I'll ask follow-up questions as we discuss each topic. We also have two members of the media, Lat Egan of KSL Television and Ben Winslow of Fox 13, who will also participate in our questioning this evening. Last week, the Utah Debate Commission held a random drawing to determine who would speak first, and it was determined that Ali Isom would have the first opening statement. So, Ms. Isom, please, 1 minute.
I was at the cafe in Enterprise, and 6-year-old Jakers was licking ketchup off his fries while his mom told me how she wants to raise him right. Mr. Lee refused to help towns like Enterprise. I helped the Westons hang Raspberry Days rodeo banners, and they need drought relief. Mr. Lee voted against it. Woodland Hills evacuated when wildfire threatened their homes. Mr. Lee fought the funds to fight those fires. And town and local leaders, they tell me they don't even bother meeting with him anymore. They don't need a lecture. They need a letter of support. You stayed too long in Washington when you forget the people who sent you there. When people won't work with you, when you can't get bills passed. I am Ali Isom. I'm a conservative Utah Reagan Republican. I'm a business and community leader. And I get things done because I fight for the right things.
Ms. Isom, thank you. Ms. Edwards, your statement.
Thank you. I'm running for the U.S. Senate because Congress is broken. Utahns are tired of leaders with no vision and no results. Utahns expect and deserve elected officials who do not focus on personal gain, cronyism, and D.C. politics. Empty promises and obstructionism don't fix roads, protect our country, or address drought. There is a better way. For 10 years, I served in the Utah House of Representatives as an effective leader who fought to find common ground and worked for solutions over and over. I won 5 elections as a Republican from Davis County. I've unseated an incumbent before when he wasn't doing his job. Mike Lee disrespects the people of Utah when he doesn't show up, and it's symbolic that he's not here with us tonight. It's time for more productive, proactive, and inclusive leadership in the United States Senate to fight for the people and businesses and families of this great state, and that's what I'll bring to the U.S. Senate.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for those opening statements. Let's stick with you, Ms. Edwards. My first question tonight, what differentiates you from your two Republican competitors in this race?
I appreciate the opportunity to highlight what I think is one of the hallmarks of my public service, which is effective leadership. When I served in the House, I tackled some of the biggest, thorniest, challenging issues that faced our state and families and businesses, things like affordable housing, growth in our state, access to health care, clean air, education. These were things that mattered to the people in my district and mattered across the state. More importantly, I was able to accomplish things that set the stage for future work because I brought people together, I listened, I learned, I brought people from within the Republican Party and worked across the aisle in a bipartisan way to always find solutions. It's what we need more of in the United States Senate, and that track record is what sets me apart from all the other candidates in this race. And the reality is that I've won more Republican primaries than every other person in this race combined. Senator Lee's won 1. I've won 3, and no one in the race has even been involved in a Republican primary prior to this. We cannot afford the opportunity for this state to witness another 6 years of ineffectiveness of Congress. Congress is broken. Mike Lee is one of the major contributors to the obstructionism and gridlock that we're facing right now that's leaving the people of Utah and the people of this country behind. We need a leader who is visionary, who has a track record of getting things done, working in a bipartisan way, and working on the issues that matter so much to the people of Utah. That's what I did in the Utah House. It's what I'm uniquely qualified to do in the U.S. Senate, and I'm excited to continue to work on behalf of the people of Utah.
Ms. Eisen, the same question. What differentiates you from your competitors?
You know, in this race, I feel a little like Goldilocks. I'm not the candidate who voted for Biden, and I'm not the candidate who compared President Trump to Captain Moroni or Mother Teresa. I'm a classic Utah Republican. I'm a Reagan Republican. I believe that it's not appropriate to use fear to keep us where we are. The politicians affect our lives every day and forget that the real world is choosing between paying your gas bill or filling your gas tank. You know, I grew up in a family that struggled. Hard scrabble roots, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. I cleaned movie theaters and cafeterias. No one opened a door for me because of my last name. I'm the only candidate who's had the private sector business leadership experience that allowed me the opportunity to navigate the EPA and the FDA and understand why bureaucracy stifles innovation, why regulation hurts investment. And I've seen front row why it makes a difference when political leaders make decisions for the private sector. I'm also a candidate with global experience. I understand how this nation fits into the bigger picture, how we're regarded across the world. My experience has been working with government, with religious leaders, in tech and business, with the top leaders in this state to produce real results for things that really matter to Utahns, for Utah school children, Utah seniors, LGBTQ people, for our public lands and our water. And I have a reputation for getting the right things done because I focus on the right things, on principles, on policy, and on process. All of those things matter, and they get us to good outcomes.
Thank you. Let me do one follow-up. Ms. Edwards, are there any specific policy differences between you and your opponents? When you go back to Washington, you say, this is what I can do that perhaps they can't.
I think we see evidences of Mike Lee specifically not being able or willing or having the desire or the capacity to sit down and do the hard work. You know, Congress and especially the U.S. Senate is intended to be a deliberative body where people get in, they roll up their sleeves, they bring a variety of voices together, and they work. And we're not supposed to be having people there who are looking at this office as an opportunity to write books, see personal gain on the media. And for me, policy-wise, I do stand out on things like public lands. I worked on issues around energy dependence in the state of Utah. I support the conservation efforts that are so embedded deeply in the way of life here in the state of Utah, and I don't vote no on the repeat on issue after issue, whether it's public lands or immigration, because I don't stop at no. I take my principles forward and continue to work hard on the issues. Things that I worked on here in the Utah House have continued to be foundational for additional work. Work that I did on affordable housing was innovative and novel and has continued to be the groundbreaking work that future efforts on affordable housing have happened here in the state. In addition, things that I did with climate. We became the first state in the entire United States that was heavily Republican that even passed a piece of legislation acknowledging climate change. That was because I was able to bring people together. That has become the roadmap, the basis of the roadmap the state has continued to use on climate and clean air. That's the type of vision and action that people depend on and they deserve.
Thank you. Ms. Eisen, the same question. What are the policy differences you see between you and your opponents?
I can tell you the things that I would not have voted no on. I would have voted for the PILT authorization, which is the payment in lieu of taxes program that benefits rural communities, rural citizens, rural towns, rural school children. Those things matter. I wouldn't have been the one to oppose the Navajo water rights settlement. I wouldn't have been the one to oppose the 9/11 first responders bill. I agree with Mike Lee 1,000% on the budget, but it's the wrong message at the wrong time to the people of Utah. I would have supported the Japanese internment memorial. I agree with Mike Lee 1,000% on public lands, but it's the wrong message at the wrong time to send the message that we don't care about those who have paid a price in our nation for our freedoms. And I wouldn't have voted no on the Violence Against Women Act. I understand very clearly what women in this nation face and the protections that were needed. And it was just a matter of being the one nay vote in obstructionist. I've heard too many people who are familiar with the incumbent's record talk about him being the Israelite, wandering in the wilderness, determined to continue to lose for the things that matter most to Utah. And I can tell you, I will not be voting no, focused on a gnat, when the real issue is how do we help Utah move its values forward. Another example for me that matters a lot is the Emory County Public Lands Bill. Emory had worked for years on a solution. Our delegation was supportive and had worked for years on this solution, and Mr. Lee voted against it. He let Utah down in the hour that it most mattered. And I promise you, I will be there when Utah's counting on me to show up. I will be there 1,000%, ready and willing and carrying the water on the things that matter most to the state.
Thank you both for those responses. We're a few minutes into our debate, so this is a good time for me to ask you both to keep your eye on the clock as we look for 90-second responses to these questions. And if there's rebuttal, it'll be 30 seconds, so we can get as many questions in as we need to. This next section, we want to talk about guns, safety, and some of the events that have happened for the past month and decades, actually. So to Ms. Isom to start, both of you are strong proponents of the Second Amendment, so my question does not refer to eliminating or changing the right to bear arms. But given the horrific mass shootings that have occurred the past 3 weeks and in the decades prior, what will you do on the federal level to stop or curb deadly gun violence?
You know, my heart is with 22 families in Uvalde who are planning funerals this week. I know what it's like to bury a child. It's the worst case scenario, and you are never the same. And my heart aches for them. And we owe it to them, to those that they will bury. We owe it to them to get this right. I wish the answers were easy. I wish it were just flip a switch and we could fix it all. But we need to have in this nation some very serious conversations around several issues. What do we know? We know that there was a young man whose family was in distress, who fell through the cracks, who was suffering hopelessness and despair, who felt isolated and disconnected from his community. We know that there was a family in need. We know that he demonstrated aggressive behaviors, that he wounded his grandmother, and we know that law enforcement let him down. I'm willing to have the hard conversations on weapons. Absolutely. But this is not the responsibility of responsible gun owners. Responsible gun owners, I know, support an expanded background check. Responsible gun owners are willing to have conversations about red flag laws, but show me a red flag law that works, and let's have that dialogue. And lastly, we all have a responsibility to address a pervasive culture of violence. We have become far too disconnected from one another. We are failing to see one another as humans. And our political leaders have a responsibility to stop using language that dehumanizes and alienates and marginalizes other people.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, the same question.
Thank you. I think it's interesting, of course, top of our mind before last night was the situation in Uvalde and those families and children. The reality is that since that time, we've had several additional mass shootings. This is something that we have to come together and actually address in a serious and thoughtful and pragmatic way, because this is not okay to continue to have these challenges facing our children and people across our country. We know that if there is one issue that matters, that I've heard more about than any other as I've been going around the state, it is this issue. And of course, I support the Second Amendment. I have a concealed carry permit, and when I served in the Utah House, I supported constitutional carry. This is something, in addition to my taking an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, I did 5 times when I was serving before. But I also know that it's important for us, as we come together, that we look at the things that are the most politically viable, things that have bipartisan support right now include expanded background checks, supports for mental and behavioral health. And as we look at those, we also need to think, what are the things in the short term and the long term? Those are short-term kinds of conversations we need to have. And I've been encouraged by the things I've seen here in the state around safe firearm safety education, safe storage, and addressing the 84% of gun deaths in our state that come from suicide. We can do better.
Thank you. Let me follow up specifically. You mentioned a few of these things with background checks, and Ms. Isom, you mentioned the red flag laws. There are 12.5 states that have red flag laws. Connecticut has shown some promise. Others have shown promise, though the data is still pretty new. So I want to give you each 30 seconds to answer this question. Some Republicans are supporting raising the weapon purchase age from 18 to 21, increasing background checks, and encouraging red flag laws in each state. President Biden, just before our debate, came on and said he wants to ban assault weapons. So of those 4 things, if you can remember, Ms. Isom, what would you support as a Republican senator in Washington?
Would you repeat I
will
wasn't
repeat
writing
the
fast
4.
enough, so.
So raising the weapon purchase age from 18 to 21, increasing background checks,
Okay.
encouraging red flag laws in each state, and or banning assault weapons.
Okay. I have delightful young men in my home. With all due respect to them, their frontal lobes are not ready to handle an assault weapon. And I would argue that it's probably a good idea to look at the age limit. I would also support the expanded background checks and looking at red flag laws. I also like Maine's yellow flag law because it brings in healthcare professionals into the conversation. But again, I want to see a practical scenario where they actually work. And lastly, the assault rifle ban. I think we need to look at the caliber. We need to be sure what we're talking about, because I think the term gets thrown around loosely and we're not always clear on what that is. So we need to define that pretty narrowly.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, the same 4 questions.
I really believe that supporting the Second Amendment and addressing firearm safety are not mutually exclusive. So the things you've mentioned, increasing the age to 21, background checks, expanded background checks, red flag laws, and assault weapons. These are all things that absolutely have a place in our discussions. Some of these are best taken care of and appropriately taken care of at the state level. Red flag laws is an example of that, because the ways states deal with this are unique to them with the police and laws. And I think we need to have conversations on the federal level that can support individual states' rights around this issue.
Thank you. Let's go to another easy problem, like energy and oil production. The European Union on Monday agreed to ban most imports of Russian oil, so it's the latest stress point and reshuffling of global energy supply. Experts say that will have ramifications on price for every country in the world or on access for oil. So my question speaks specifically to construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, which was stopped by President Biden. It would bring an additional 900,000 barrels of oil from Canada directly into the U.S. each day. Do you support reopening construction of the pipeline and bringing that oil to the U.S.? And who did I leave off with? Ms. Isom?
Oh.
Ms. Edwards?
It's her
Ms. Edwards, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I would much rather look at oil and gas exploration through the expansion of the Keystone Pipeline than I would from importing goods from neighboring countries that are bad players on the global scale. What we know is that energy independence matters tremendously. And as we look at opening up or expanding Keystone Pipeline, we have to realize that this is not like turning on a water faucet. This takes years to do this. So that's one of the problems when you see extreme policies coming out of the executive branch, is that they don't take into account long-term planning. In the Uinta Basin, for example, we have some of the cleanest product that is out there in terms of natural gas and oil. And those products are going to be around for a long time, and they are going to play a role in our energy independence here in our state and in our country. Some of the cleanest we have, we need to support that industry. In addition, we need to have some strategic investments around renewable energy. And these are things that we know are clean, they're affordable, and they're sustainable. We don't have to look much further in Utah than what's happening in Beaver County and the way in Beaver County they have hydro, wind, solar, biogas, and geothermal that is so extensive in that basin west of the I-15 that they could power the entire state of Utah for 200 years were it not for the fact that the grid is built out. This brings me to number 3. We need to expand our capacity with the grid. This is where infrastructure dollars come in, play a very important part. Expand our infrastructure and make sure our grid capacity and our safe and secure grid are a focus for us for a long time.
Thank you. Ms. Isom, your thoughts on the pipeline?
American consumers paid an average of $4.61 a gallon on Memorial Day weekend. This is a real issue that's hurting us right now in everything we purchase, especially when you go to get groceries. You feel it most then. I bought $300 worth of groceries, and it wasn't even a full week's worth of groceries recently. That's ridiculous. We need to help relieve American taxpayers now. I would support opening the Keystone XL pipeline. That construction is going to take time. I also support permitting being expedited, and that's going to take time. What I do know is right now we have reserves that are available, and they are not being made available by the Biden administration because that administration is pursuing deals with bad guys abroad. And it's too bad because we've made ourselves so vulnerable in this situation. It was needless. We had American energy independence, and I think the last few months have revealed the fact that we're very vulnerable on this front. So I don't just support independence on this front. I support American energy leadership globally. We have to reestablish ourselves. A strong nation is a safe nation. And it's time for us to move forward on this. The other thing I want to talk about is expediting in the regulatory system. Right now, I feel like the American taxpayer and American consumers are pawns in the greater scheme between the right and the left and producers. And everyone's using the crisis right now to further their agendas. It's time for straight talk with the American taxpayer. It's time for action by our leaders. And I'm so tired of orchestrated political theater. I want them to be honest and do the right thing now, today.
Let me do one follow-up, and you can take 30, 60, or 90 seconds with this. Ms. Edwards, are there other moves you would make to deal specifically with the high cost of gasoline? In other words, are you willing to take off the federal tax? Would you support getting rid of the state tax for a certain amount of time? Or what specifically could be done?
Well, I think it's important to remember that these conversations about expanding renewables and some of these other more affordable energy alternatives really needed to take place 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But we'll discuss them today because now is the time we need to have conservative viewpoints on this issue. It's not okay to continue to have one party with extremist views on kind of controlling the agenda, and the other party with extremist views not even coming to the table. So first of all, let's actually address the fact that these solutions need to include people coming together. And in addition to the things that I talked about, I think there is a role for us to talk about all items on the table. You know, as we actually are looking at what energy looks like and what climate looks like here in the future of our country and our nation, it really depends on us being able to look at our global partners and our allies and partners, but also our global people in our economy. I think what China does to produce goods and what we see in Europe to produce goods, and I'm talking about energy things as well here, is when we think about the restrictions that we're going to put on our products for carbon pricing, potentially. We need to have conservative voices on these issues and make sure that as we talk about that, which is something that deserves our best thought, that we also have border adjustments. So we are holding China and other partners that we have, economic partners, to the same standards we hold ourselves.
Thank you. Ms. Isom, you touched on some of these, but any other specific items to bring down the cost of gas?
You know, last night, as Eric and I drove our campaign trailer past the Maverick in our neighborhood and realized we needed gas, every pump was cordoned off. And the thought went through my mind. It reminded me of the 70s and the energy crisis we had there and how precarious it feels right now when we're paying high prices and supplies are threatened. And for me, this is another instance where I think too often we expect government to fix every problem. Some of this will be corrected by the market. This is a supply and demand issue, and they're out of flux. They'll eventually regulate themselves or center themselves, but we have an opportunity right now to reassert strength. And I think we start with not making deals with the bad players and actors around the world. We start by freeing up the reserves, and then we expedite permitting. But I'll tell you, the reason I got into this race was because I think we need to refocus on conservative principles, that now more than ever, the values of the Republican Party, they really matter. And too often, our parties become distracted by personalities and culture wars, and we fail to focus on core principles. The government closest to the people governs best. The government has a limited role. We believe in low taxes and in individual freedoms. Those principles matter when we tackle some of these enormous problems. And we've got some hard decisions to make in this nation right now. And more than ever, those principles are needed.
Thank you so much. We welcome Ben Winslow of Fox 13 News to the microphone, who will ask our next question. Ben?
Yeah, you both have talked about working collaboratively, so I did want to ask this. What policies of your opponents in this race do you support, maybe you wish you'd thought of, and if you're elected, you'll steal it, take it to Washington, D.C., and champion it? And then I have a follow-up after that.
Let's go to Ms. Isom for that question.
You know, for me, when I look at Mr. Lee's record, there's a lot of rhetoric and not enough action. So for me, when I look at the things that he touts the increasing the PILT is important, that the payment in lieu of taxes program matters to rural Utah. And rather than sending a letter to every other senator talking about how important it is and then voting against it, I won't just send a letter, I'll get it done. When it comes to public lands, I'll be at the table helping everyone solve the problems. When it comes to Utah's water, I absolutely will step up. I won't be the one touting how important water is and then vote against bills to study and preserve the Great Salt Lake when it's in danger. We have some real issues that need to be addressed, and for me, it'll be a matter of no longer giving lip service to the things that matter to Utah, but showing up for Utah. We have an empty podium today because he has utter contempt for the people of Utah, the people who have sent him to Washington, D.C. He's not here to be held accountable, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a basic principle of the Republican Party. We believe in accountability.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, your response to Ben's question?
I have always made a habit of respecting and working with anyone who is willing to sit down and do the work of finding solutions. Over and over with Senator Lee, we have seen a lack of his ability and desire to do that very thing. In addition to that, the thing that's been very, very heartbreaking for me is to go around the state as a candidate and hear in communities around the state people who say, I have been trying to go in and visit with Senator Lee on an issue that matters tremendously, whether this is education, suicide prevention, the needs of small communities, especially in our remote and rural areas and our marginalized communities and underrepresented. And over, I'm hearing the very same thing from them. We can't get in to see Mike Lee. He will not see us. He will not send a staffer. And it's heartbreaking for those people. But mostly I feel bad for Senator Lee. He's missing out on the heart and soul issues and people of this great state when he refuses to listen and be intentional about including those voices that can inform his understanding of the issues around things like energy independence, around what it looks like for job creation in our remote and rural communities here in the state when people are having to send their kids out of their communities because there are no jobs for them. Teenage suicide that is so rampant in our communities, an epidemic in some cases, homelessness, and what that looks like as we look at affordable housing. We can do better. Mike Lee needs to do the work we've elected him to do, or we don't hire him back.
Thank you. Ben, you have a follow-up, and we'll go first again to Ms. Isom.
Yeah, what issue do you think that you can find common ground with Democrats on and actually pass in the spirit of bipartisanship?
Ms. Isom?
I think when it comes to the issue of school violence, public shootings, this is definitely an area where it demands bipartisan approaches. It demands collaborative approaches. We owe it to those families to sit down at the table and not continue to be divided and partisan on this issue. So on that issue, I think especially we can come together. And that breaks into several subsets, not just the gun issue, which I think seems appropriate and obvious, but also mental health. We need a national approach to mental health. This ties into the criminal justice system. It contributes to our homelessness issue. Over and over again, we've ignored those in need. And there is no portal into services for the American people, especially for young adults who become free of privacy restrictions when they're 18 years old. And all of a sudden, we've got young adults in crisis and no one able to help them. We need to find ways forward. And that means we've got to sit down at the table together. I welcome the opportunity to work with people of the other party. In my experience, I've had a lot of experience doing that in the governor's office, in state agencies, sitting down together as a matter of bringing the right minds to the table. And when I tackle issues I don't understand or know or have an idea about, first thing I do is put a face on it and identify the people affected. Then I go by the principles that are impacting that issue. Then the policies that will last, and fourth is process. Have all the stakeholders been invited to the table? That's a place for partnership. And then the last thing is politics. So for me, bringing Democrats into that framework is so important. They help us identify where we can find mutual solutions, where solutions might be weak, and where solutions could be more durable, more impactful, and help more people.
Thank you so much. If you're just joining us, we're about halfway through a debate featuring Republican Party candidates for the U.S. Senate primary election. I'm Doug Wilks, and I am moderating today's exchange. As a reminder, Utah's primary election is June 28th. If you're an active registered voter, you should start receiving your ballots next week. You can contribute your comments and questions to the live broadcast on social media by using the hashtag #UTDebates. Now let's get back to the questions and invite Ladd Egan of KSL to the microphone. Ladd, welcome. Your question, and we'll start for Ms. Edwards.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you this evening. You know, Utahns and the rest of the Mountain West, we are dealing with inflation that's higher than the rest of the nation, and there's big concern over affordable housing. Many worried if their kids or grandkids will be able to stay in Utah. So I've got two questions. How would you combat inflation? And then what can be done about Utah's housing shortage and affordability problems?
Ms. Edwards.
Thank you. You've mentioned two of the biggest issues that families are facing right now in this country. And coincidentally, they happen to be two things where Congress is not leading out. They're not doing their job. And if there's an example of this where Congress is broken and the chains of communication are not working, it's on inflation. We have seen a complete lack of will and political discipline on spending. You know, it's been since 1998 that we've actually passed a balanced budget in the United States. That is not okay. The spending that has continued to flourish and grow exponentially since that time puts a burden on small businesses and families across this nation that is almost unbearable. And what do we do about this? Well, we start by doing the job of Congress, which is to hold the purse strings for the nation and to have fiscal discipline, curb the spending in small and large ways. You know, my first year I came into the Utah House of Representatives was the first year that we actually were creating a full year state budget based on the revenue of recession year in 2009. Those were hard conversations. We had to actually have conversations with state agencies and do the hard work of curbing spending, finding out what the priorities were and how to achieve those in new innovative ways. We can do better around that. When you mention affordable housing, this is something that I worked on in an important and innovative way, finding public-private partnerships on a state level. And when we think about the federal level, though, it's important that we access all of the resources that are available for us by making sure that we have a robust national low-income housing trust tax fund, and that we access bonds in 4% and 9% rates so that we can be innovative and nimble to address where our needs are the greatest. This requires all parties to come together, local, county, state, and federal, to make sure that we address this issue that will impact our state for years to come.
Thank you. Ms. Isom, the same question.
When it comes to inflation, I think there's a three-pronged approach. The first one is monetary policy. We have to stop printing monopoly money. We have flooded the economy with too many dollars, and we are seeing the impacts of that. The second thing is we need to pass a balanced budget amendment. Congress has failed us time and time and time again. Take a look at the last 12 years and take a look at the national debt and tell me what Mike Lee has done to reduce that debt except be a stick in the spokes. You have to affect the process, and that starts with a balanced budget amendment. The other piece of that solution is a budget reduction plan, a spending reduction plan. This state balances its budget mandatorily every single year. I did it the whole time we were in the governor's office. We balanced the budget every year. We worked as state agencies to ensure there was a balanced budget. It can be done. And if we take the right principles to Washington, D.C., it can be done there. Mike Lee knew that. He could have affected the process long ago. It's easier to call a press conference and oppose things like the 9/11 first responders bill at the wrong time. We need to make the points on the budget at the right time. We also need to not give Congress one more paycheck until they do their job and balance the budget. We need to cap the debt ceiling. Unless there's a war at stake, I think there are lots of other ways we can reduce debt, but capping the debt ceiling is important. Now let me tackle housing. It's a big issue. We need a surgical approach. Too often government oversteps. So let's not focus our solutions on supply, but let's look at financing and use a scalpel to address that for those most in need and allow the market to do what the market needs to do. And I've worked in the past on affordable housing and homelessness issues as a state administrator, as an agency administrator, and I can tell you the CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grants, being granted back from the federal government has not had a champion in this state since Orrin Hatch. And it's time for somebody to champion that and get block grants back to the states, get our tax dollars back to the states, and solve our problems on the local level. And then let the leaders at the local level who know the problem best solve the problem best.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, I jumped the gun and didn't give you a chance to respond to the question about bipartisanship and reaching across the aisle. Would you like to respond to that question?
I would like to respond. Thank you. I think it's time for us to stop pointing fingers and instead asking pointed questions on the issue of climate and energy development. This is something that for far too long we have not had good conservative voices on. I'm encouraged by the work of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus in both the House and the Senate and would plan to certainly participate in that caucus. In addition to that, though, I really do feel like this is relatively low-hanging fruit here. This is a tall ladder and a big reach, but it's something that matters tremendously to our state. It matters to our national security, matters to our economic growth, and to have someone who understands the issue, who has worked in this in a bipartisan way. As I mentioned, being able to be the sponsor of the very first piece of legislation anywhere in the country from a red state that acknowledged our changing climate, our responsibility for environmental stewardship, and the importance of supporting a robust, diverse energy economy and the impact that that will have on our rural economies here in our state, up in the basin and Emery carbon counties. Those are things that actually it does matter if you have been in the arena, not just talking about things, but actually making change and seeing things done, working for solutions. That's when it matters the most. And I'm excited for the opportunity to take this issue to the federal level.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to a new question, and we'll start with you, Ms. Isom. Do you believe that the 2020 presidential election was fair and accurate? Your response.
Yes, I think the outcome of the election is what it is at this point. Looking back and pointing fingers is not a helpful exercise in any way, and I think numerous courts have validated that the outcome was legitimate. But that doesn't do away with the fact that we have a lot of people that are concerned that their votes somehow don't matter or have been canceled out. And I do think it's worth stopping and pausing and examining voting processes in every state and ensuring security in that process. Now, elections are a state responsibility, and in no way do I ever want the federal government to take responsibility for that. But I would like to see an audit report annually of what's happened in the states and what are the best practices. I'm very concerned about cybersecurity. I'm concerned about nation states hacking into the systems. And I want to make sure that Americans have every bit of confidence in that process. Every Utah voter deserves to know that their vote has been counted once, and that it matters in the process.
Ms. Edwards, the same. Do you believe it was fair and accurate?
I do believe it was fair and accurate. I have concern with a candidate in 2020 who began sowing seeds of doubt of one of our foundational institutions here in the country, which is safe and secure elections, a full 18 months before this election even occurred. In anticipation of a loss, seeds were sown that started to create doubt and suspicion and paranoia about the outcome, the potential outcome that continued those 18 months up until the election and for months afterward. In addition, what I have a deep concern about is the engagement on that very issue from our senior Senator Mike Lee. We're sitting here 2 years out from the time when he was engaged on a very intimate basis in a small group of people, exchanging text messages and reportedly spending up to 14 hours a day for a week and more to explore ways to overturn a legal and lawful election in this country. This goes beyond the exploration of every legal avenue and looking at things state by state, which every one of those had been explored, and I support that, found to have no widespread fraud. But to have our senior senator still 2 years out, where the people of Utah still have questions about timeline, about intent, and still feel like we don't have answers to those questions, that egregious behavior needs to be held accountable for him, and that lack of transparency is appalling.
Ms. Isom, a 30-second response.
I appreciate the time. And here, again, we need to step back. Americans need confidence in the electoral process. Every Utahn deserves to know that their vote counts. My problem with Senator Lee's response on this is that he wasn't fully transparent in the beginning. And he told us one thing from the floor of the U.S. Senate and then later provided a different story. And that's not okay. You owe it to your constituents, you owe it to the people of Utah, you owe it to the people who sent you there to account for your time, to tell them the truth. We can handle the truth, Senator, and we want the truth. And if there's one thing I know from Utah voters and my time this year walking in Utah's back roads and spending time in Utah cafes and speaking at Utah markets, is the fact that Utahns want the truth from their politicians and leaders.
Great. Ms. Edwards, any other response on this matter?
I just think of the people of Utah who, instead of having their senator, Mike Lee, texting someone and saying, please tell me what I should say, to a political crony, as opposed to, please tell me what I should say to the people of this state, we have a problem.
Thank you. I'd like to go to a tape, if we have that queued up. We have a pre-recorded question from Jason Williams of KVNU Radio in Logan. If we can go to that, if both candidates can watch, and then we will, let's see, we'll go to Becky Edwards first.
Regardless of which party holds a majority in the United States Senate, it would be easy for anyone paying attention to think of the United States Senate as a bit dysfunctional. There's talk now of filibuster reform, even changing the way United States senators are elected, expanding the Supreme Court to take some of the politicized nature of Senate decisions out of the mix. Do you as a candidate feel the Senate is dysfunctional or even broken? And if so, what would you, as one of two voices in the United States Senate from Utah, do to fix it?
Ms. Edwards, to you, there's a lot in there.
There is a lot in there, and I think really speaks to a lot of the concerns that people have when they feel unheard and unseen and frustrated with the kinds of things they're seeing out of Congress. A disconnect between the work, or rather ignoring the real work they're supposed to be focused on, and the real lives of everyday Utahns. I think this dysfunctionality ends up impacting people's trust. It also impacts the way that we look at our future as a country. And I'm talking to people in colleges around this state who, and I quote, a young woman from Cedar City who told me she feels nihilistic about the future. And it's because of this hyper-partisanship and hyper-politicization of every single issue that pits people against each other. We want to go back to a time when we didn't move from, I don't like your idea, or I have a different idea, I don't like your idea is bad, in fact, you're bad, in fact, you're evil. That process happens way too quickly, and it sets us apart from each other in ways that is not productive. We see both parties, the extremes in both parties, play into this very same trap. We can do better, and the beauty of this is in the United States Senate, one voice can make a difference. We've seen efforts in a bipartisan way where people have come together with a group of 10 or 12 and fashioned together legislation that made a difference across this nation. One voice matters, and with all due respect to Senator Lee, he is one of the most egregious contributors to that gridlock and obstructionism in the entire United States Senate.
Ms. Isom, so we talked about filibuster, the Supreme Court, whether the Senate's dead, or not dead, broken, excuse me. Go ahead.
I really think it's a great question, Jason, and I welcome the opportunity. The U.S. Senate is indeed broken. Congress is broken. We know Mike Lee is 15% as effective as Orrin Hatch was as a senator. Gone are the days of Hatch and Kennedy cooperation. The new metric for success in the U.S. Senate is how many times you've been in front of a microphone on cable TV, not the bills you've passed. Trust is the currency of the U.S. Senate. And Mike Lee has neglected the opportunity to build relationships and trust. He's content to wander in the desert for 40 years instead of building solutions. He's content because he's had time to write 6 books, while 4 bills have his name on them. He's been very ineffective for the state of Utah, and he doesn't show up for us at the times we need him most, on water, on public land. Too often, the Senate has been focused on what advances careers. The filibuster, for example, I think we should stop phoning it in. We should stop phoning it in. It has become complete political theater. Now, what am I going to do about it? Number one, I don't have an affinity for the microphone. I can tell you that. I'll be working hard for Utah. I'll be working hard to build bridges and relationships. I believe there are good people that are willing to do the work and roll up their sleeves. I was told by one particular member of our delegation when I was investigating whether or not I would get into this race, I thought, is it a hopeless swamp? And I was told there are good people here. You'll find what you're looking for, Allie. And I will be looking for partners and allies that can solve our problems, that are ready to roll up their sleeves, that are willing to have the tough conversations. I'll be addressing process. I'll be looking at policies that last. And we'll be finding real answers for the people of Utah, because I will know Utah and be listening to Utah actively. I will show up.
We're getting near the end of our debate, so let me ask this one question. We'll start with Ms. Isom, but if you can take 60 seconds, perhaps rather than 90. One of the roles of the Senate is to support our national security by legislating funding, including for the military. The United States will send Ukraine advanced rocket systems and munitions as part of a new $700 million package of military equipment intended to help the Ukrainians fight back against the Russian invasion. Should there be a cap on funding, or perhaps should the U.S. be doing much, much more? How would you approach that in Ukraine in such a volatile situation?
It is such a volatile situation. And for me, this issue has become deeply personal, because we're a bootstrapped campaign, and campaign headquarters is the Isom household, and it smells like borscht at campaign headquarters, because we have a Ukrainian family that has become our family staying there. And every day they're calling home to make sure their loved ones are still alive. So this issue is front and center, and I pay tremendous attention. It is the right thing to contain Putin and Russia. Putin has shown us who he is, and the stakes are very high. And it's not just a ground war. There's a cyber war as well, and let's not ignore that front. Mike Lee has voted against military funding every single year for 12 years. He doesn't show up for Hill Air Force Base. He doesn't show up for its families. He doesn't show up for our military installations. When it comes to the funding of Ukraine, it was the right thing to do. Would I agree to a cap? I think it is situational. The dynamics change by the day. We have a responsibility to NATO and to our partners to be there for them. And I think it's going to take good judgment and prudence. I don't want to see American lives on the line. That's where I draw the line. That I think it's right and fair and appropriate for us to support Ukraine right now.
Ms. Edwards.
Thank you. What we're seeing right now in Russia is a pattern. In fact, in the last 15 years, Russia has gone into sovereign nations 3 times. They've had aggression against Georgia, Crimea, and now Ukraine. This is a pattern, and it will continue if we do not hold strong on Russia. What this means is that when this war is over, we want to ensure that Russia goes home worse off than they were when they began the war. And this means through sanctions, serious, hard sanctions that are going to impact this country for a long time. As far as exactly what this means for the armaments you've talked about and supporting, I think we certainly take advice and counsel from our military intelligence. In addition, we look to our partners and allies in NATO and others that we can make sure that we support the efforts there and give Ukraine the things that they need to stand up for themselves as a sovereign nation. The world is watching. Most importantly, China is watching. And we know right now they're thinking about how this is going to impact any aggression they're thinking of towards Taiwan. And Mike Lee voted against sanctions for Russia and voted against support for Ukraine. And in fact, he's the only member of our federal delegation who's still welcome to travel to Russia. I think that says something.
Okay, we're nearing the end, so I want to ask you one more question, and you have 20 seconds to answer it. What are your top 3 priorities going back to Washington? If you wish to elaborate, you can do that in your closing statement. Ms. Edwards.
Thank you. Top 3 priorities, I've talked a little bit about the first one, which is energy independence. Second one is immigration. We haven't had a chance to talk about immigration here, but it's something that matters tremendously to our economy, to the safety of our country. And I think that there is a real movement and a necessity for Congress to stop kicking the can down the road year after year, and in fact, decade after decade. We need to have conversations in that arena that move the needle forward and create a safe and expedited way for legal immigration in this country for once and for all, and support the efforts to make sure that can happen. And then the third thing, let's actually tackle spending for real. It's not enough to talk about spending when you're a candidate and then 12 years later blame the federal government when, in fact, Mike Lee is the federal government.
I've got to cut you off.
Congress. Okay.
Thanks. Ms. Isom, your top 3.
My priorities are Utah's priorities. I've spent time in Utah cafes with local officials, walking with farmers and ranchers on the back roads of this state, across this state. And what I hear first and foremost, the economy, second, water, and third, energy. The economy needs to be tackled on several fronts. That includes our monetary policy, stop printing money, our debt approach. We need a balanced budget amendment, a spending and a mandatory spending reduction. And then on water, defend what we have. And on energy leadership. Independence is inadequate. We need to restore American strength.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for this lively debate. We are now ready to go to our 1-minute closing statements, and as noted, this was determined prior to the debate. So Ms. Isom, you go first.
Okay. We all know the Utah way. It's showing up. It's taking responsibility. It's being accountable. It's listening. It's developing relationships and trust. And in this instance, Mike Lee's absence today speaks volumes of what he feels about the people of Utah. Today, you missed out by not hearing him. And I promise you, I will continue to listen. I have a record of listening, and not just listening, getting the right things done. More than ever, we need a different kind of leadership, not the kind that uses fear to keep us where we are, the kind that gives us hope of what can be. I'm a classic Utah Reagan conservative Republican. I'm a business and community leader. I might be a little bit of a policy nerd, but I get things done because I fight for the right things. So I'm asking you to join me. Let's get the country back on track. Take a look at my website. I'd love to earn your support. And let's get the right things done, Utah.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, 1 minute.
Thank you. You know, at the end of the day, this election is not about me, Allie, or even Mike Lee. It's about you, the voters, and the people of this great state, and about a future for you and your families that is full of opportunities for your family to grow and thrive. You know, a few questions for all of us. Has the national debt gone down in the past 12 years? Has spending decreased in the past 12 years? Of course not. That's a no. Utahns are tired of politicians who have broken promises and contribute to a broken Congress. We need leaders with a track record of actual legislative work and effective leadership in the issues that really make a difference in our country. It's time to bring productive, proactive, and inclusive leadership to the United States Senate. It's exactly what I'll do. It's what I base my entire professional and political service doing, and I look forward to your support. BeckyForUtah.com. Thank you for your engagement, and may God bless the great state of Utah.
Thank you both so much. I'd like to thank Becky Edwards and Ali Isom for participating in our debate this evening. We'd also like to thank doTERRA International for sponsoring all of our primary debates. I'd also like to thank our broadcast and university partners. As a reminder, Utah's primary election is on June 28th. And on behalf of the Utah Debate Commission, I'm Doug Wilks. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Check, 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 check. Check 1 2 1 2 3 4. Check, check, check. You will.
Yeah, you'll hear it, Brian. If you stand there, they'll hear you. I can hear you, right?
You guys are so far away.
Thanks for joining
Sorry
us
about
again.
that.
When they said scrum, I was thinking it'd be like
thought
when
we
I
would be
worked
like
for the
all up in
governor,
your-
and y'all would be
all
like
up in your
in my
grill.
face. Yeah. So I'm like, it's kind of, yeah, that's
I mean, if you want, I'll go grab my microphone. We can, you know.
right ahead. You look very dapper, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, with the shoes and all. Yeah.
That's just called having to walk a lot.
Dude, yours are more practical.
All right. Your reaction, how do you feel like you did in this debate?
You know, I answered the question at one point that in this race, I often feel like Goldilocks, that I'm not too hot or not too cold. I'm not the one who voted for Biden. I'm not the one who compared Trump to Captain Moroni. I hope Utahns see me as a conservative alternative, one that will fight for them and speak up for them. And I appreciate so much the Debate Commission's effort to provide us a forum. It troubles me greatly that Mike Lee is not here tonight, that he hasn't shown up for Utah, that he has prioritized the party and a fundraiser over the people of Utah and accountability and being here on site for them tonight. When you're a public official, you owe it to the people to speak to them, to listen to them, to be there for them. It speaks volumes that he chose not to be here.
Much of your fire tonight was directed at Senator Lee. Why didn't you turn some of it against your other opponent?
You know, Senator Lee's the reason I got into this race, because I thought Utah needed a different kind of leadership. I think Utahns are intelligent, and they can find ways to get the information they need to make decisions. But one thing I'd like to point out that maybe wasn't brought up, my opponent was rated the most liberal Republican in the Utah House of Representatives, 7 of the 9 sessions she served, and the other 2, she was rated number 2. If you look at Adam Brown at BYU, he did a study of voting records, and I think tonight is an opportunity for Utahns to see I'm a reliable conservative, a Reagan conservative, and that's how I will act in office.
But you didn't say that during the debate.
Well, I wanted to focus on Mr. Lee's record. This is about running against Mike Lee.
What about guns? You say you are the conservative challenger to Mike Lee, and yet you seem to support raising the age to buy an assault rifle. Becky Edwards did not endorse that proposal or any of the president's proposals. Are you the liberal candidate on guns?
Oh, heavens no. Heavens no. I am a classic conservative who supports the Second Amendment, and this is about responsible gun ownership. And we owe it to those families, the shooting victims, every shooting victim's family for the last decade. We owe it to them to get this right and to have the conversation that needs to be had. The devil's in the details, right? It comes down to the actual legislation. So we can talk about hypotheticals all we want, but the conversation needs to be had about what is the appropriate age for this. I don't have a problem with having that conversation when it comes to these kinds of weapons, because it does seem that those that have more of a military style are attractive to certain personalities or mindsets, and we ought to be thinking seriously about why and what's happening here. I think there are greater social dynamics at play here, and the culture of violence is super troubling to me. We have got to tackle this issue in the right ways and have the right conversations.
In the next few weeks leading up to the Republican primary, what are you going to be focusing on as you reach out to constituents to try to move the needle in your direction?
Yeah, this is a grassroots campaign. We've been people-powered from the beginning. I'm really proud of the fact that most of my funding, if you take a good look at it, at least 95% or more of my funding comes from in the state of Utah, whereas take a look at Senator Lee's funding, so much of it is coming from outside the state. Right now, I am focused on reaching the Utah voter, those who show up. I'm speaking to homeless Republicans, and there are hundreds of thousands of them who unaffiliated because they felt like they didn't have a voice or place in the party. And my message to them is come home to the party. There is something here. These values matter to this nation now more than ever. The seams of our republic are fraying, and we've got to get back to the core values and what makes us Republicans. I'm speaking to them and saying, your voice matters, your vote matters. I need you, we need you, this nation needs you to show up on June 28th.
So you're trying to get more people to affiliate back with the Republican Party who've left?
Absolutely. We need them. We need them. I believe the more voices at the table, the better the outcome. And we need more people in the Republican Party to be speaking up for all perspectives, all ages, all life experiences. They all matter in the greater conversation. We'll get better public policy outcomes that way. But I get very discouraged when people don't show up. I believe in the ability or the right of every Utahn to vote, to have a say. Your voice matters. Every vote matters.
Just to be clear, related to gun policy, the president...
You can't let that go, can you, Brian?
I can't let it go.
Yeah. Okay.
Related to gun policy, the president tonight proposed removing reliability shield for gun manufacturers from prosecution. Also, raising the age to purchase assault rifles to 21, which we've already mentioned, and then an assault weapons ban. Are you saying you're open to a conversation about these things, or you support these proposals?
You know, I'd have to take a closer look at the first item you mentioned just now. So
prosecution liability.
Yeah, I mean,
if you use a gun in commission of a crime, you'd want to see more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now the conversation needs to focus on expanding the background checks and looking at mental health issues and how we address that. Let's start the conversation there. That's a big and hard conversation all by itself. I'm willing to put all options on the table, but they have to make sense. So show me something that works. Show me something that works. We failed those families when we failed to help the shooter's family in the first place. We've got to take a look at what's happening in our communities and our deeper societal issues.
So you're saying you're open to a conversation about background checks and raising the age to buy an assault rifle and red flag laws. You're not supporting them. You're open to a conversation about them.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you right?
But let's have a conversation about responsible gun ownership. Let's have that conversation, because it's not responsible gun owners that are the problem here, right? It's a young man who fell through the cracks of society.
But you're open to a conversation on those other things.
Well, I'm open to a conversation about anything all the time, Brian. Like this, it's not, there's no easy answers here. It's not going to be flip a switch and we're going to solve this problem. What else you got?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for coming tonight. I really appreciate y'all covering it. It means a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you for helping the people of Utah make a good decision.
There. This is the ultimate distancing. All right, we ready?
I think so. Eric, is it going still?
We're ready.
Okay. So how do you feel like you did tonight?
You know, this was a great opportunity to bring the issues to the people of Utah, and unfortunately Mike Lee was not here, which was not a surprise for any of us, because on the repeat, Mike Lee has failed to show up in action, in tone, in effectiveness for the people of Utah for 12 years.
I want to ask the same question I asked of your opponent tonight. Much of your criticism was at Senator Lee. Why didn't you direct more fire and draw a bigger distinction between yourself and Allie Isom?
You know, at the end of the day, I'm not here to debate Allie. I'm here to debate Mike Lee. I'm here to hold Mike Lee, our senior senator, accountable for his ineffectiveness for the state of Utah for the past 12 years. He ran on two things. He ran on fiscal responsibility, and how we'd achieve that would be a balanced budget. Second thing he ran on was limited government, and how we'd achieve that would be on term limits. We're sitting here 12 years later. We've seen absolutely no action on either of those fronts. I think the people of Utah deserve an opportunity to have our elected official be held accountable. And if we remember, this is the first time that Mike Lee has had Republican opponents for the last 12 years. We deserve an opportunity to choose better leadership, better solutions, and better representation for this state. This is the year we can do that.
Was your strategy also an admission that you don't believe Allie Isom can win?
Our continued focus has always been on Mike Lee in the primary. We have had an incredible amount of momentum build up and grow. In fact, a movement, what we call the We the People movement here around our campaign since we announced our candidacy just over a year ago. We have had metrics that have proven over and over that we continue to be the leading Republican challenger and always have been in every single poll, every single fundraising. You know, we have over 1,500 individual people around this state who are volunteering with our campaign, boots on the ground people around the state who are putting up lawn signs, making calls, helping gather signatures, and over 3,000 itemized donations from coming for our campaign, more than we've seen in the recent past. Most interesting thing here is that 88% of our itemized contributions come from within the state of Utah, as compared with 19% of those coming in from within the state of Utah on behalf of Mike Lee. So dollar for dollar, we nearly double the amount of money raised from within this state on this campaign as compared with Mike Lee. What that begs the question is, why are there so many people outside the state of Utah who have a vested interest in an ineffective, out-of-touch representative for this state in the U.S. Senate? And who is Mike Lee really beholden to?
Was there a topic that didn't come up tonight that you wish you could have addressed on the debate stage?
You know, I think immigration is something that's top of mind for a lot of people, and I mentioned it as one of my priorities. It's something that certainly is a very, very stark example of ineffective Congress kicking the can down the road for years and decades, and Mike Lee certainly contributing to that. What we know about these really tough issues is that it matters a lot to have people who are willing to come together. You have to be willing to do it. You have to have a skill set and a mindset that you bring to the table that says, let's listen and reason together to actually work on something. And I think when we see the hyper-partisanship within both parties, to be honest, on the left and the right, we see that it's leaving out the opportunity to come to solutions on some of these things. And it's nice to say, you know, on Mike Lee's side that he would work on this, and he rails certainly against the federal government frequently. But I think he forgets that the federal government, actually, Congress is part of that. And he is part of Congress, and we need to hold him accountable.
What are you doing as you head into these final weeks to try to move the needle in your direction as you head toward the June 28th primary?
Well, we are relying on, like I say, these over 1,500 people around the state who are super enthusiastic about a shared vision that we have for better leadership, someone who can actually bring people together, someone who has a track record of being in the trenches, of actually creating and passing legislation. This is not easy work that we're talking about. None of these issues we talked about tonight are simple. They're not easy. They required our best effort. They require people who know how to do this work and have done it before. The U.S. Senate is a body of individuals representing states across this nation who have the tremendous responsibility and opportunity to do good things, to represent the people of this country in a real way. And it's heartbreaking, actually, to see that opportunity continue to be missed because people are mired down in their own personal gain and the hyperpartisanship. There is a better way. It's what the people of the state want, and it's what I'm able to bring to the U.S. Senate.
You were asked a question tonight about guns and the president's new proposals. Allie Isom said that she's willing to have conversation, at least about some of it. You did not say that. Are you willing to have a conversation about any of the president's proposals, or background checks, or red flag laws?
Oh, I think I've not only said it, I've done it for 10 years in the Utah House. I've been someone who doesn't just talk about doing those bipartisan works and working within the large spectrum of the Republican Party, but I've actually put boots on the ground to those efforts. And I have said over and over on this issue, that this deserves our most thoughtful, considerate, and careful language as we look at protections around firearm safety and protecting our Second Amendment rights. This is not something that we can address in a knee-jerk way. It is not something that we're going to address like in, one here or here. These are not mutually exclusive. And I worked on, we talk a lot about mental health and how important this is in this issue, as well as some of the other things. But mental and behavioral health is something, as a professional social worker, I worked in my professional life on this issue and have a deep commitment to this on the legislative front, on a state level. And I know there are things that we can do on a national level, things that may impact families in ways we can't even imagine. For instance, the National Mental Health Crisis Line, 988. The supports that happened within this state on that issue and nationally make a big difference. And when I sponsored and passed the first telehealth bill here in Utah, that was a pilot program for specifically around behavioral and mental health, because it's people around the state who don't have access to that kind of care. It's our rural and remote parts of the state specifically that I know are vulnerable. They're missing out on help. It's why I care so much about mental health. But absolutely, expanded background checks, something that I've long talked about wanting to support. And all the other options, let's bring those to the table. Let's have productive conversations that are thoughtful, and let's stop weaponizing weapons. Let's get work done.
So what about raising the age to purchase an assault rifle to 21?
I think these are all part of the same thing. When I say let's bring all the solutions to the table, let's do that.
Red flag laws too.
Red flag laws, in general, I believe are best left to the states, because the things that help support those processes for red flag laws really are so unique state by state. So this is an example of where the federal government can certainly step in and support things. But on red flag laws specifically, I do believe that those are best left to the states.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.